Good morning. It's Friday. Thank God for Friday, February 21st. We've had a busy week. We're going to have I think, a very broad and great discussion on S60, an act relating to establishing the Farm Security Special Fund to provide grants for farm losses due to weather conditions. We've got a full panel of folks ready to discuss that. I think we have a committee that's very interested in hearing this discussion. And I think we're going to start the morning off with our counsel, Michael O'Grady. Welcome.
Good morning.
Michael, how are you doing?
Well, do you want me to put anything on the screen or are you okay with that?
Are you with the bill and all that?
Yeah.
Does everybody have the bill or what do you want?
Yeah, it's on our website.
It's on the website. Everybody got it? Okay, so we're good.
Okay. But so just for context, over the past few years, as I'm sure you are aware, there have been multiple weather events, flooding, freeze, drought, which have put significant pressures on farms because they've either lost crops, say with flooding, when floodwater hits a crop, it's either adulterated or freeze, they've lost their pollination time and their ability to fruit, or drought, just low yield. And there have been efforts over the past few years to do kind of event specific or sector specific relief assistance for farms affected in this way by a weather event. So instead, this bill proposes a program that is not going to be event specific or sector specific. It would create a program at the Agency of Agriculture to administer a specific special fund to provide financial assistance to farms that experience certain qualifying losses due to weather conditions. And it would be broadly defined weather conditions, broadly defined what would be a qualifying loss. And then it would be about administration and application, prioritization of awards, etc. And that's effectively what this does generally. So I'll move into the bill specifically. There's a finding section that relates that in 2023 and 2024, there was extreme flooding and other climate disasters that devastated farms. Many existing state and federal programs are designed to support farms that are difficult to access, administratively burdensome, and not equitable or equitably distributed to small and medium scale farms. On page 2, you'll see federal crop insurance is not designed to serve the needs of smaller scale, more diversified farming, and many Vermont farms don't have crop insurance because of that. Sometimes crop insurance isn't even available for your crop. And then the state should establish a permanent funding support program to maintain the viability of farms, to ensure food security, climate resilience, rural economic vitality, and environmental health. Continuously invest in farms in a way that makes them more resilient and provides a source of relief funds permanently available to farmers impacted by climate emergencies and extreme weather. So those are the findings. I'll just say I'm not a fan of findings in general, but these are pretty accurate. So moving down to page 2, line 12, section 2, there's a new chapter added. Well, actually, no, there's an amendment to the existing chapter on promotion, marketing of Vermont food and products. It's now going to be about promotion, marketing, and support of Vermont farmers, foods, and products. There'll be a new subchapter added. There's a definition of what is an eligible weather condition. It's any of this list we're going to walk through that are found to be closely correlated with agricultural income losses. And that includes on page 3, high winds, moisture, flooding, precipitation, heat, freezing, fire, hail, drought, or other severe weather growing conditions impacting agricultural income, as determined by a board that's going to be attached to this fund to help with the administration of grants. On page 3, you'll see a definition of farm. This is basically the definition of farm that comes from the RAPs without all of the language about leaseholds. So it's a parcel or parcels of land owned, leased, or managed by a person devoted primarily to farming, and is subject to regulation under the required agricultural practices. I referenced earlier that the definition of farming in the RAPs is essentially the definition of farming from Act 250. But there's also what's called the NOAA's ARC list. In order to be considered farming and not just some backyard person that has 30 chickens, you need to have a certain amount of animal or a certain amount of revenue from your farm. So you need 4 equines or more, you need 5 cattle or more, 15 swine, 15 goats, 15 sheep, 15 cervids, 15 turkeys, 50 geese, 100 laying hens. So your 30 chickens is not going to make you a farm. And I'll go on. It ends with 1,000 pounds of cultured trout, which nobody really knows why that's in there.
Cody, that defined enough.
That's who is a farm,
Right.
for the purposes of this program. And then there's the review board that's set up that you will see in a minute in 4634. And then farming has the meeting in section 216 of required agricultural practice. I'd like to read that to you because it touches on, what you were talking about in pre-discussion this morning.
Mm-hmm.
Farming, the cultivation or other use of land for growing food, fiber, Christmas trees, maple sap, or horticultural and working crops, or the raising, feeding, or management of livestock, poultry, fish, or bees, or the operation of greenhouses, or the protection of maple syrup, or the on-site preparation and sale of ag products, principally produced on the farm, or the on-site storage, preparation, production, and sale of fuel or power from ag product or waste principally produced on the farm, or the raising, feeding, or management of equines owned or boarded by the farm, raising, feeding, or management. So for purposes of regulation under the RAPs, which also is how you get exempt from Act 250, exempt from local zoning, equines is farming. Moving on from there, on page 3, line 17, there's a new section that's added, the Farm Security Special Fund. It's to be administered by the Secretary of Agriculture. It references 32 VSA Chapter 7, Subchapter 5. That's a chapter in the title about finances of the state. There are specific requirements for how a special fund run. This just incorporates all those specific requirements. On page 4, it's going to include funds appropriated by the General Assembly. So this is one of the things that probably needs discussion, because usually special funds have a revenue source or some receipts that are going into it, plus any funds appropriated by the General Assembly. So right now, it's just relying on an appropriation, and usually special funds are set up to exist outside the appropriation process so that they always continue to survive. So that's probably, I think, one of the major questions. Page 4, lines 6 through 8, the Secretary should ensure that there's language accessibility to the fund, and then all balances in the fund at the end of the year carried forward. And then you get to the grant program. The Secretary, after consultation with the review board, who we'll look at in a second, awards grants to farms that have incurred financial losses or expenses due to an eligible weather condition. They shall be in an amount that reimburses the farm for up to 50% of uninsured or otherwise uncovered losses due to eligible weather condition, up to a max of $150,000 total per year per qualified applicant. The Secretary shall establish criteria for the amount of award based on the annual net income of the farm in relation to the median net income of all farms in Vermont. This is basically a modifier so that if you're a really profitable big farm and you suffer $150,000 worth of losses, but your overall net is going to be millions of dollars in gain, that you're not going to be prioritized for an award under this program. And that's what that modifier is intended to do. You might want to look at that to see if that's suitable for what it's intended, but that's the intent of that subdivision. Page 5, the secretary may verify the occurrence of eligible weather conditions through a site visit or looking at NOAA data or from any other data sources. The losses that are reimbursable by a grant include wages or compensation, replacement of lost income from destroyed crops or impacted livestock, debt payments, cost of replanting, livestock feed replacement, infrastructure or equipment repair and replacement, repair of farm roads and roads necessary to access farms, or other losses as determined by the secretary after constitution review board. The secretary develops an application that has a brief description of the damage, an attestation of the eligible weather condition or event, an estimate of losses, and a year-end report of your farm income from Schedule F of the U.S. Internal Revenue Form 1040. The funds are open until exhausted. It's a first served program, but an application shall not be ready for evaluation until the secretary determines it's administratively complete. That's so you don't just get to put in a form that says I applied for a grant and you're number one in line. You have to put in an application that meets all the requirements that the secretary has in the application form. And once you've done that, that's administratively complete. That can take time to do. You might put in your application originally and the secretary says, I need more information. It's not complete. You put it in again, said, I still need more information. You put it in again. That might take some time. So just because you apply first in line doesn't mean it's administratively complete. All of the administratively complete applications are evaluated by the review board within 10 days of that administratively complete application. The review board recommends whether the secretary should issue the grant. If the review board does recommend, the secretary issues the award within 2 weeks of the date of the review board's recommendation. Just stopping there, that is not the end of the grant conditions. There is an entire administrative bulletin in the executive branch on how grants are issued, what needs to be complied with, et cetera, et cetera. So there are additional requirements for the state to assert its due diligence and its financial responsibilities over any grant. It's not just this grant program, it's over any grant. Administrative Bulletin 3.5. And then on page 6, line 16, there's the review board. It's created with administrative purposes to be attached to the agency. It's composed of the following persons: the Secretary of Ag or designee. Secretary shall serve as chair. The state chief recovery officer or designee right now, that's Doug Farnham. The representatives of 3 organizations or entities with experience granting relief funds or technical assistance to farmers appointed by the secretary, and 2 farmers who have received relief funding appointed by the secretary. The next section is member terms. It's generally, basically it's going to be 2-year terms. Well, it's going to be staggered, right? So there's generally a 3-year term, but you start off with 2-year terms for some, 1-year terms for others, so that there's overlap in membership of the board. The board power, page 7, line 18, the board reviews applications, assesses their accuracy, and recommends to the secretary applicants who should receive assistance. In order to ensure that the fund is meeting the needs of the community, the review board annually reviews the entire program and makes recommendations to you, the General Assembly, on ways to improve it. The board may elect officers or establish subcommittees for more committees, I would caution the board that if you create subcommittees are agencies of themselves, and that can create problems. Quorum about having a majority for voting, compensation, private members get per diems and reimbursement. And then on page 9, section 3, there's a section about funding. This doesn't intend for there to be an appropriation in the first year. It is the intent that it shall receive an annual appropriation equal to 50% of the average documented losses. But in order to basically calculate that, you'll see page 9, line 6, sub B, to determine the appropriate funds for deposit in the special fund. The agency recommends to you an amount to be appropriated based on the farm losses from eligible weather conditions averaged over the previous 3 calendar years. So the agency is going to have to do that before there's even an appropriation. On before January 15, 2026, the review board shall submit to you, the General Assembly, a recommended appropriation for the special fund. So looking at how this fund is going to be capitalized and work, not going to start to work probably until July of 2026 if you've appropriated money into that fund.
Right. Questions, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael, it's always good to see you. Like you, I'm not a huge fan of findings. We did hear testimony yesterday, I believe, that in sub 2 or on page 17, we reference small and medium, but not large scale farms. And I hope that there's not necessarily an ability to impugn from that we're leaving out large farms. I don't know exactly what purpose though that particular piece serves. So
Where are you again?
page 17, I'm sorry, page 1, line 17.
Sure. I think this is in relation to some of the relief programs that have been provided over the past, I would say, 10 years, that they have mainly been focused on dairy and have largely benefited the larger, medium, and large farms. And so I think that was the intent. With that said, the program doesn't exclude large farms.
Understood.
There is that modifier provision, but that could, it doesn't exclude a large farm. That's all about whether or not you have income related to the median income of all farms. And if you're a large farm and you've had severe losses and in relation to the, you're still gonna qualify.
Okay, I just wanted to people to understand. I did hear the testimony yesterday, and if we want to leave that particular finding in, fine, but I do think it puts a spotlight on small and medium at the expense of large to some degree. The second point, I don't know where we've ever used NOAA as the basis for weather determination. I mean, that's what they do, I guess, but to call that out specifically, how does that intersect with FEMA or some of the other agencies on a federal level that deal with weather?
You honestly don't need the reference to NOAA. You could just say from federal or state certified weather data sources.
Okay.
And that would give the secretary flexibility. He or she could use NOAA or not.
Okay. I didn't know if there was a particular reason where, and we've got two of the co-signers in the room, why that was put in there and not just.
Probably because they have an inventory of like weather events.
Okay.
And that could be easily accessed and used for verification.
And then another point was made, I think yesterday, about the review board, and the way it's written, maybe it's not allowing all of farming community type folks to be on that board or to at least give input as to who gets a grant, who doesn't.
It sounds like it was, a line in here that did leave the secretary flexibility to add Farm Bureau or add up to 3 people as far as to come into it. So it sounded like, there was some flexibility to
Okay.
add that language. I just want to make sure that it's right, because that was one of my questions too.
And Senator Engels,
Yes.
if I may, I asked Jackie specifically, and I think Farm Bureau would be excluded from that, from her reading of it, because they do not grant either funds or technical assistance. So we might need language to expand that if we want to include Farm Bureau.
Those are the points I had.
Composition of the board is solely within your authority.
Correct.
However you would want.
And I guess to Senator Callen's point, even having, and I didn't kind of realize this until yesterday's testimony, even having smaller, medium-sized farmers in there kind of excludes large farmers just by having that in there. And if we get rid of that, just have, farm, or the farm.
Or the definition of farmers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just have the definition of farmers
Because- Yeah, but just having that in there, it almost focus that, but there may be a large farm that is eligible for this, because of the gap of, assistance that they could not receive.
You have all the authority to amend the bill that you want. You don't need to reference small or medium. It can just be for homeowners.
You are. I love it.
Are we risking anything, making this the de facto, crop insurance, place to where people are gonna say, well, I don't need to go out there and buy crop insurance now because we have this fund?
Good question.
Remember that this only covers uninsured losses, right? So if you had insurance, it's not gonna cover that. I do think that it is an option now for a farm to say, all right, my crop insurance premium is gonna be this, and it's only gonna pay out this. If I calculate that and balance it against what I might receive from this fund, if I'm deemed eligible, it's still, you have crop insurance is more of a certainty. You pay, you hit the criteria, you get paid. This is dependent on if there's money in the fund, how many applicants are in the fund, what the award's gonna be for those persons, where you are in line. So this is not a certainty as opposed to crop insurance. So, but it will be part of a, you would
Strategy
have
plan
that.
by somebody. So you mentioned something at the beginning and kind of at the end, and it was about funding. One of them is it's an uncertain funding to have appropriation, but at the end of the bill, it sounds like it does away with that. It's because they're going to ask for funding based on 3 years worth of losses. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So what I said at the beginning was that special funds usually have a revenue source, something that like the property transfer tax and how some of that goes into VHCB or and municipal, funds. And that's every year. You don't need to change that. You just need to determine how the allocation is going to be made. This doesn't have that dedicated revenue source. And it's partially because they're want to have a baseline. What is the baseline? And that's what the 3-year average is about, finding what the baseline is. Maybe the review board comes back after they know the baseline and says, hey, we're generally going to need X amount of dollars per year on average, and here's a revenue source for the fund that will generate that, or at least partially that. And you know, that's how you do special funds. You know, solid waste fund, there's a tax on trash. You know,
So said a different way, if we pass this bill, we shouldn't be trying to go to appropriation. I mean, we can do whatever we want, but we shouldn't be trying to go to appropriations to fund this for the effective dates of July 1st, 2025, because it's gonna be determined.
Right.
It's gonna be determined in the way that we pass a bill out.
the concept is find the baseline and then look for appropriation for fiscal year 27.
Okay. So I'm gonna go down through some questions that I have, but I think they've all been answered. It sounds like we've been determined how the rewards, how the reward or how much of our award's gonna be granted. With the up to $150,000 or whatever. So,
Right.
I mean, that's been determined. So it's nothing that we'd have to change language there.
So I would recommend talking to the agency about what they think is administratively feasible. Because you've done some relief programs in the past where the agency said the requirements that you built into the program were too difficult for farmers to navigate. And they had to create a database, and the database was hard for farmers to work with. And so I think, and the finding section does reference this, it needs to be administratively workable. And I would talk to the agency about
Okay.
their opinion of that.
We'll bring them on next then, but, we've answered kind of the question, who's on the board. Senator Collmore brought that up. We can get through that. We've talked about the funding question, and we talked about the large farm question. We talked about the reporting period. And we talked about the de facto and, whether it's gonna be the de facto insurance, placed for people to go to. Any more questions, for Council O'Grady? Thank you, sir. We're gonna, we have a large list. I just want to tell everybody that's on the screen, everybody's gonna get a chance to talk. We're going to 11:15 today, and we're gonna get everybody, so hang with us.
All right.
And if there's something that's really, important to you that's getting discussed, that you wanna, get in, just give us a holler. We're gonna, switch our attention now to Nicole Dubuque, Chief Operating Officer, Agency of Agriculture, Food and Market. Good morning.
Hello. Good
How are you?
morning. How are you? I'm good. I'm
Good.
good.
Thank you for, attending today.
Of course. Of course. So I don't have like a big presentation. I think that was great, that we were able to kind of go through the bill. Do you want me to just give you kind of my thoughts or our
Absolutely.
agency's position?
The floor is yours.
Sure. Okay, so I think let me start off with, I have kind of two hats in the game here. So I'm the for the record, Nicole Dubuque, Chief Operating Officer for the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and I'm also the co-chair of the Agriculture Recovery Task Force that has been working on, making sure that we are all in alignment with our partners since 2023. So I want to start off with just saying that our position as an agency is that conceptually, the concept of a disaster relief fund for agriculture, we absolutely agree with. That was one of the recommendations that came from the Agriculture Recovery Task Force in our report that we put out in 2023. And I will also say that I really appreciate that some of the language directly from those recommendations was incorporated into that bill. That said, from an operational standpoint, I think we have some concerns around funding to actually administer this program and maintain a board and all of the administrative functions that come with that, and also acknowledging that we do have other boards where sometimes it is difficult to schedule and maintain a quorum. And so in this instance where we would need to be doing that quite quickly in order to get money out the door fast, that's just, I want to name that as something that comes up as a concern for me. And then I spoke a little bit to administratively being able to have internal staffing available to do what I'm hearing is outlined in this bill. And we probably need more details on what that looks like, but it looks like there's some data reporting requirements, as well as kind of keeping track of when there is a designated weather event, as well as, maintaining the administrative functions of the board and complying with the bulletins 3.5 and 5 for grants and contracting when we put out awards to folks. So there is some components in here where I think we would need some capacity to adhere to that program. And then also, I just want to point to, there was a proposal for a disaster relief fund in the governor's recommend, which it looks like it was $2 million of general fund for a grant to Vermont Economic Development Authority to establish a disaster relief fund. So I just want to name that as well, that would have a similar concept of creating a fund that's not specifically for agriculture, but would be managed outside of our agency. So just going to point to that as a thought on this. And I did have a couple of other things just around criteria, and I don't know how deep in the weeds you want to get, but I think we would need to know more.
The floor is yours, Nicole. You do with what you love. We're here to listen.
I think we would need to know a little bit more about what the triggers should be. It looks like we would be developing that as an agency, perhaps with in conjunction with the board. So we'd want a little bit more about that. And then a thought that I just want to put out there is that this is very clearly derived from the last 2 years of us experiencing flooding events, droughts, deep freezes, unseasonally deep freezes, I should say. But I'm not seeing anything, if we're talking specific to agriculture, that would address any of the one-off situations that we have a fair amount of, which is like barn fires, or we had a barn collapse actually this last week. And when we talk about insurances and what's available, I think it's absolutely accurate to say that the crop insurance options available do not work well for smaller diversified farms. And when I say smaller, I actually even mean some of our large farms, which would be probably classified as medium farms in some of the larger dairy states like New York. So I say that kind of across the board, that I know that the crop insurance options that are available are not great, but also the insurances available to insure farm structures are really unaffordable. So I just want to put that out there as well, that if we're going to focus on a disaster fund on weather, I think that's great, but also acknowledging that we do have barn fires, barn collapses, et cetera, and being able to insure those structures is very difficult. So those are really my overarching thoughts, and I'm happy to take any questions about kind of how our agency operates and what it might look like to operationalize a program like this, but it would definitely require additional capacity for us.
Questions before I go ahead?
Whenever I hear that word capacity, I get a little nervous. Are you saying that you might need new positions?
So what I'm saying is that I'm making an assumption that we have two divisions that are non-regulatory that could kind of take this program within them. And that would either be our agricultural development division or perhaps our administration division. Within our agricultural development division, we have a lot of braided funding within those positions, meaning that a lot of them are limited service and they are funded with federal funds. So we don't have the autonomy to just assign them new work based on how they're funded. So that would likely mean that it would fall either within that division and yes, would need an additional position, or it would fall within the administration division, which we don't have a position there either. I guess the option could be that if there was an administrative component to this funding, which we don't know what the funding is yet, but if we were able to have a percentage, we might be able to use one of our current positions and braid that funding in, but we'd have to do an assessment of what the overall, I guess, need would be for like the reporting and how often the board would need to meet outside of an emergency and things like that. I think we'd need to have a brainstorm session on what that would look like.
But Nicole, as far as that, but don't you already have people that are in that capacity already? And this would be something that would be an added duty to what they would do?
So we don't. So we have grants and contracting staff, but like I said, a lot of them have this braided federal funding to work on specific projects. So like USDA dollars that come through us that we then put back out. And they are limited service. Other than that, if we look at the folks that we deployed for like BGAP, for example, the Business Emergency Gap Assistance Program that ran in 2023 and 2024, we had a subcommittee, I'll call them, for agriculture applications specifically, and we did not have extra bandwidth. We actually deployed current staff, including myself and other directors, to kind of like do that when we were able to via like overtime and other kind of making bandwidth for ourselves. So for emergency programs, no, we do not have positions dedicated to that.
So I'm wondering, again, hearing about this funding mechanism, imagine this, and being a little bit, funny about it, but there is some attitude about this bill to actually establish some funding, funding first now. I think, there's people who are willing to talk about starting this out with maybe some seed money and then trying to get to the point of the 3-year average and to get there so that we can get this program out the door a little bit quicker, other than a 2-year time period. As far as a number of where those dollars might be, is that something, again, just kind of a wide ranging thought? Is that as far as to get a quick number out there to what would sufficiently set a program up like this? Is there a number that anybody would be able to come up with in a short amount of time, or leave it to the imagination of the legislature, which is dangerous?
To answer that question as best I can, I think, I can look to kind of the other proposals for established funds, which looks like it was at about 2 million. But where I'll just be transparent that this is difficult for me is we don't know what we don't know, right? So we don't know what the next disaster is going to be or what that's going to look like for farms. So sorry to give you kind of a non-answer there. I don't know off the top of my head.
That's where I thought it might go, but it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
Okay. Any more questions, Nicole? Any more?
I don't think so. I'm happy to stay on and answer any questions that come up about our agency specifically and how things might work. But no, I think overall, like I said, conceptually, we agree with the bill. Just have some ongoing thoughts and questions about administratively how that would work.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Do we have Chief Recovery Officer Farnham on? Okay.
Were we talking to him?
Doug Farnham, is he on? I don't see him.
No, he's not. He couldn't come till a little later. Maddie has it.
Okay, Maddie. Okay, Maddie.
Thank you very much. All right. So set for the record, Maddie Kempner, Norfolk, Vermont. Should be. There we go. All right, excellent. Thank you, Chair Ingalls and committee for having me back today to speak about S60, the Farm Security Fund. Very glad to have that review from Ledge Council. I want to share a little bit about the genesis of this bill from our perspective within NOFA, where it came from, what we see as the need for it and what it does, just from the perspective of a farming organization. I also want to say this fund is supported by this bill, is supported by all the organizations that you see here on the screen. It has been really developed and supported by a broad group of farming organizations in the state who represent all different types and scales of farmers from all corners of the state. And this is really important. As you know, we all need each other in the agricultural community. We need all types of farms, all scales of farms, and it's really exciting to me, frankly, to see all of these logos and these names here together supporting the bill. So just want to emphasize that. When we worked together with the farming organizations that you just saw on that screen, we really, and in working with Senator Hardy, really tried to think about what we have learned from the last couple of years. And from NOFA's perspective, we've had our Farmer Emergency Fund, as I've told you, since 1997. So we've learned as an organization a lot about what farmers go through in times of disaster. And we really used what we've learned along with the other organizations that we worked with to craft a program that really meets those needs in a way that's not being met right now by other existing programs. So it's really important to us that this fund is simple to apply for, especially in a time of crisis. Farmers are put through so much in terms of reaching out to many different government agencies and potentially nonprofit partners for support, all while they are working really hard to clean up the damage that they've experienced on their farm and just recover the actual, land, animals, infrastructure. So we really feel like it's important that this is simple to apply for and that it turns around payment quickly. So in the bill, you've heard Mike O'Grady explain that the payment should be turned around within 2 weeks for an approved application. And that 2-week period is really essential and something that we heard was very important for farmers, especially who have employees who need to make payroll. So there, were so many farms in 2023 who were devastated in the flooding, and then were in a position of having lost all of their revenue essentially for that season, and were forced with the choice of laying off their workforce who depended on that income for their own livelihoods, and also who the farm needed to be there to help them recover. So that immediate payment portion is really important to us too, because we know farms need this money very quickly so they can get their feet under them and get back in business as quickly as possible.
But I'm going to ask you a question, kind of how I asked Nicole, but a little bit different. And maybe we don't know that number. There's no wrong answer at all. Just looking for information. How many affected farmers did we have in the last floods? Do we know any type of number as far as with that? Or was there 100 or 50 or 75? And again, there's no wrong answer, just looking for information.
Yeah, great question. So a lot of the information for 2023 is in the Ag Recovery Task Force, which I can send to the committee to make sure you have a copy of it. There's a lot of detail, thanks to Dr. Beckford and Nicole for co-chairing that task force. I believe the number in 2023 was 264 farms. I don't know off the top of my head for 2024, but I do believe we have that data, largely because of BGAP.
Right.
We know the number of people who applied for that funding, even if it was more than those who received grants.
And we would take that information, please, if you could send it.
Be happy to send it for
Thank
you. It's a tab I regularly look at in my internet browser. And then the other thing is that this money be flexible and proportional to meet the needs. So we've talked a little bit about this. There is a cap of $150,000 written into the bill, and the grants are intended to cover up to 50% of losses that a farmer experiences that are not otherwise covered by something like crop insurance or NAP or another program that they're able to access funds for. We really believe this needs to be permanently and predictably funded over time. And so that's why the appropriation and the formula is written into the bill in the way that it is. Farmers need to know that there is going to be a program that's there for them. And I would say also, just from the legislature's perspective, it feels much more, I would think, fiscally responsible to be planful. We know these events are going to keep happening. We know our farmers are going to be impacted by extreme weather. We don't expect that to change, and we should be making a plan for how we're supporting them going forward. And then lastly, it's really important to us that this is administered by the Agency of Agriculture because they have the expertise around what farmers need. I can say more about this in a little bit, but the fact that the BGAP program, it was an excellent program in so many ways, and it was administered primarily by the Commerce Department, and administered in a way that didn't always perfectly fit with farmers' needs. So the administration by the Agency of Ag in collaboration with the review board is really aimed at making sure this fund is specific to agriculture because they just have specific needs that we know the Agency of Ag understands. A little more background about why this is important and why it's important right now. Like I mentioned, we are seeing upticks in extreme weather and climate events in this state, especially in the last 2 years, but over the past decade as well. And I think it's really important to highlight here some news articles that we've had in the last few years, including just this week, unfortunately, on Rep. Graham's farm down in Williamstown, that barn that collapsed under heavy snow load. I should say there also were 2 barn collapses. I don't know if you all have heard, there was a barn collapse down in Brattleboro at Reebok Farm as well. One of their food barns collapsed under heavy snow load this week too. And I also want to emphasize that sometimes extreme weather and climate disasters look like large-scale catastrophic events, like the flooding in 2023 that triggered a federal disaster declaration. Sometimes, I think maybe Nicole mentioned this, sometimes it's much, smaller, more localized extreme weather events, especially because of Vermont's topography. We often have, flash flooding or flash droughts in little valley pockets or on hillsides in our state that don't rise to the level of a state or countywide disaster declaration. And so we think it's really important that this fund be able to provide support for those farmers, because even when an event like that happens and it's more localized, it essentially has the same effect, right, on that one or few farmers that are impacted, and they still need structural support to be able to recover. So that's what this bill is intended to do. This is a big number. 57.7 million is the total in damage and losses reported by Vermont farms across the last few years. This data comes both from the Ag Recovery Task Force report and the total applications for the BGAP just in the agricultural pool in 2024. And it's really important, I think, when we think about really what this kind of need requires from the legislature, that we're really considering fully the tens of millions of dollars that farmers are being asked to endure in losses right now without substantial support.
Right.
Yeah.
So of that 57, do we know how much was covered by insurance and BGAP?
Great question. I have a slide that covers that to a degree for 2023, and I could
So
follow.
if I just shut up, you'll get the answer.
That's an excellent question. It's super on point, and I can follow up with more data from 2024. But for 2023, this is showing that the total damage just from ag producers alone was that 44.7 million. If you include other food services, so food system wide, the losses were more like 69.5 million. The funding that those farmers were able to access from state and charitable sources totaled 6.9 million. So really orders of magnitude less. I don't have on this slide, and I probably should, the number that was covered through crop insurance or other federal disaster programs. So I can also look into that, and I'll have that later. Excellent. Thank you. A little more data for you. On the left here, you see in 2023, that 44.7 million number for total damage and loss. I also want to emphasize too, that number covers really just baseline farm essential losses. So that includes like crop and livestock loss, farm infrastructure and equipment loss, maybe input loss, things like that. It doesn't include damage to farmers' housing or other impacts to accessory areas of the business. So just want to be clear about that. The average income loss in 2023 was 61,000. Average percent of income loss was 28%. 27,318 acres were impacted. Biggest losses in 2023 were from lack of feed and flooded field crops. And then in 2023, 70% of respondents had no crop or livestock insurance. If you look at 2024, I want to be clear too, the top number here, the $13 million in total damage and loss reported, that's from the VGAP application pool. The rest of these numbers come from the survey that's on the Agency of Ag's website that was conducted immediately after the flooding. So there might be more current data that the agency could present. But average income loss, similar 65,000, acreage impacted 3,379. And this is telling too, right? In that in 2024, the flooding was more localized. It wasn't quite as widespread, but the income loss average is about the same. And we saw the biggest losses in 2024 were from loss of crops or livestock meant for wholesale retail markets, excuse me, and slightly a higher percentage of those respondents had proper livestock insurance, which I think demonstrates that farmers who maybe didn't have it before really tried hard to access it in the year following 2023. These are just some sad photos to remind us what this looks like. So a storm, frost, or a drought at the wrong time can really devastate a farm. We all rely on farms to eat, and we are all responsible for supporting farmers as they face increased climate damage and instability. Farmers do all they can to predict and prepare for weather and other climate realities, and even the best prepared will be subjected to events that are beyond their control. And I also want to say farming is a complex business. I'm sure you can hear from some of the farmers that are here with us today about that. We all know that, right? But as climate realities make farming even more challenging and even more complex, part of the goal of this bill is to allow farmers to focus on learning as much as they can, because they are the experts who can figure out how to farm in these conditions if we give them the support that they need. So that's what this bill is aimed at doing. I want to say a little bit about the review board. This piece was also really important to us and the other farming organizations that helped to develop the bill language. We know that farmers have specific expertise that's uniquely held by them. Our Farmer Emergency Fund at NOFA, for example, is run in cooperation with a farmer review board. That's for farmers who review every single application that we get for emergency relief. And we know from having that fund in place for decades now that that expertise is really essential, and that farmers are excellent stewards of the funds that we have available at NOFA to support farmers in recovering from disaster. And they can also help shape and improve it over time. So we may not get this right in the first year. We know that there might be improvements that are needed to this program over time. And I think having the review board that includes farmers and farming organizations can help inform the changes that might be needed. We think that it can also help to ensure equitable distribution of funds. If we have an appropriate, representative range of organizations and farmers on the board, they can ensure that everyone who needs and deserves this money is able to access it. And then finally, it really gives the farming community a role in this fund. And we've heard that from farmers too, that they really want to have some accountability and buy into this fund. And so the review board gives them some of that. You've heard a little bit about this, and there are experts in this state on federal crop insurance programs. I'm not one of them. I think it would be, if you're interested in hearing from folks who really know a lot about the ins and outs of crop insurance, we can recommend folks for you. But we do know that the paperwork and the record keeping burdens are too high compared to the payments that folks often get. You heard from Justin last week, who I know is here on screen with us, about his experience with NAP. And in some ways, that's kind of the best case scenario. Justin is an excellent record keeper. He's been participating in that program for a long time, and his payout still was pennies on the dollar. And that's not an uncommon story, unfortunately. People refer to NAP as not a penny. I don't know if you've heard that fun little acronym. And also, it's just true that most crop insurance policies are based on individual crops and not the whole farm necessarily. So that makes enrollment in these programs really complicated. For, say, Footwork Farm up in Johnson, who was really damaged in 2023 by the flooding, they grow 140 different varieties. So imagine the process of enrolling in crop insurance when you are that diversified a farm. It just oftentimes doesn't make sense, unfortunately. And then the payments that come through federal crop insurance are often based on commodity sales pricing or national data, which doesn't really reflect the costs of production here in Vermont or the pricing that farmers are expecting to get for selling their product at a retail market, for example. And then lastly, well, two more things. Congress, I want to say this first, Congress acts too slowly, if at all. It took 2 years for Congress to appropriate some funds to support small farm states with disaster relief, and we haven't seen those funds come through yet. And those are looking back 2 years at, starting in July 2023. That's just too long for farmers to wait. And obviously we and farmers appreciate that support, but we need something that will get to farmers faster. And then I also want to say we heard from a lot of producers in 2023 how understaffed our federal agencies were even at that time. And you all have been hearing in the news, I'm sure, about the layoffs at USDA just the past couple of weeks. So that's not necessarily going to get any better anytime soon. And with FEMA, which doesn't work for farms, but works for other types of businesses and homeowners, there is like an influx of staffing that happens in disaster zones. FEMA agents kind of descend on a state that's experienced a disaster to support people. That doesn't happen at FSA or RMA or other agencies intended to support farmers. And so farmers are often going into their local FSA office, and those offices are very overwhelmed in times of disaster. In terms of BGAP, again, it provided really important support to farmers and other businesses in the last couple of years. And we know we can improve upon that process to support farms better in the future. So I've gone over most of these things already, but we know that farmers need payments faster. We know that they need a program that's more specific and responsive to their needs. And that even looks like things as detailed as the timing of applications and the deadline. I think it was in 2024, the BGAP application deadline, at least originally, was in September, and that's a really busy time for most of our farmers. So it was really stressful for folks to be trying to scramble together an application while they're still in the midst of their growing season. The types of losses covered. So BGAP was only actually intended to cover physical damage and loss, which doesn't account for things like loss of feed quality, right? If you had feed that was standing in a field that got flooded and you weren't able to feed that out, that was not a loss that was able to be covered by BGAP because it was not run through the ag department. And then lastly, we want this to be able to be accessible to folks without internet access or experience with tech. We know there's a range of experience and access to the internet in our farming community. And that's something that the ag agency, I think, is positioned to handle. It's also really important to emphasize this is not just about flooding, and the bill accounts for that too. So we know you heard from David Peck last week a little bit about the experience that fruit growers, orchardists, and viticulture had in the late spring freeze in May 2023. This is also all in the Ag Recovery Task Force report, but most orchards who reported losses lost 95% at least. And UVM's tree fruit program estimated those losses at over $11 million total between orchards and vineyards. And then also importantly, 70% of those people who were impacted reported that they implemented frost protection measures and they still had major damage. So farmers we know are also experiencing increased drought, high wind events, and we've talked about the 2 barns that collapsed under heavy snow loads this week. This I think farmers are in a really good position to speak to, but I'll just say there are obvious losses that we can account for and that most folks understand when farms are hit by extreme weather. And then there's also these less obvious ones in this list on the right. So impacts to human and animal health, increased pest and disease pressure, decrease in feed harvest and quality, impacts to farm employees who are not also supported by things like crop insurance or disaster relief programs. Damage to field access, loss of markets, loss of crops that were intended to produce value-added products that can, represent significant loss in revenue, soil erosion and loss of soil fertility that gets built up over long periods of time with lots of work on the part of the farmer, and not least stress and mental health impacts. Again, we all rely on farms to eat, and we're all responsible for supporting them as they face new climate realities, especially in a place like Vermont, where foods are so important to who we are. So I'll just close by asking you to please support this bill. And we are asking for an appropriation of $20 million in the FY 2026 budget to ensure that farms can recover from extreme weather events that we unfortunately know we can expect in the coming year. And that's it. Attorney.
Thank you. Any questions?
I think Senator Palmore came up with this. Well, how do we get 20 million? How do we get to 20 million?
I do believe that the legislature has the wisdom to figure that out. I know you all have a lot of hard choices before you. And, you know, I've mentioned this before, and I don't know how much we can depend on this. There is that federal money that's coming in. And it's possible that we could look to some of that if it arrives. I hope it does. I hope it does.
Okay, thank you very much, Maddie,
Thank you so much.
as always. We're gonna, I just wanna make sure that, Chief Recovery Officer Doug Farnham hasn't made it yet, and I have respect for his time, and, I don't believe he's joined us yet, and so I'm gonna go with, Charlie Roy, claims specialist.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on. I am a claim specialist for a major insurance company. And then I've also worked with under the NAP program and worked for FSA in New England. I'm here today to just speak for myself and not basically represent my company. But I'm also been a small farmer for over 20 years, a dairy farmer. I retired from dairy in 2000 and got into crop insurance. So I've been adjusting crops for the past 24 years for both FSA and for a couple of major companies. And I'm pretty, I like my crop insurance. It's a major safety net for a lot of our farmers in the New England area. We cover a lot of different crops and everything. And I just like to make a distinction when they talk about crop insurance. There's NAP, which you get through the FSA office in the federal government, that covers crops that aren't necessarily insured as they would be through the private companies like corn and soybeans and all that, which we insure in the state, and apples and sweet corn and things like that. But and I kind of understand where they say NAP, not a penny. But when you have 100 crops or 50 crops, a lot of these small diversified farms, there is quite a lot of paperwork involved to do it and get them paid right. Most of them get paid. Is it what they should be paid? Maybe not, because their markets are a little bit higher. But for crop insurance for MPCI, there's many agents. Mary White, I believe, will be on the call today. She has some statistics that she'll show you. We get people paid for their crops. There's a lot of flooding the past couple years, and we were able to work, and I also work with RMA and the federal government to get some diversions so that we could get more funding faster for the farms. And that's one thing that we can do with crop insurance. We have direct deposits and everything, and their agents walk them through all the paperwork. So when I read page 1 here, 17 through 19, I don't really care for it because I care so much about crop insurance and everything that it isn't difficult to access. It isn't administratively burdensome. Maybe for a few of these specialty crops, it might be through NAP, but through MPCI, it isn't. There's talented agents that will walk them right through the process, get their policy set up right, and everything was equitable. Where I have small farms I work on that could be 1 acre, or we could be up to 2,000 acres. So they all get treated the same and fairly. So that's what I want to say about crop insurance. It's a good program. And I hope people don't take this to say, all right, I don't have to buy crop insurance and just leave it with the state. I don't think that's the right way. We should maybe require them to carry crop insurance if they can get it to where it isn't so burdensome. And then when we're talking about, the number of cattle that represents a farm, like 5 head of cattle, 15 sheep, turkeys, 100 laying hens, I wonder who goes around and counts all this to see if they actually qualify? We talk about the Schedule F form. Why not just put a minimum requirement that you have to get $1,000 or $2,000 in annual farm income to qualify for this?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's some of the stuff that I just wanted to say. I don't know if you have any questions for me. Like I said, I've been doing this for 24 years.
What was your payout in Vermont on crop insurance in the last couple of years?
I've got it right here.
Mary White has all those figures for you.
Okay.
And
Okay,
she can tell you.
Okay, we're gonna have her come up when now that we know we got those numbers. I just want to I've got, thank you very much, Charlie.
Well,
for
thank you. And
coming
it's
in.
like I said, I care about
Stay
crop
on,
insurance.
stay
I care
on. We might
about
have
our
to
farmers.
refer back to you. I want to
Okay.
just get, out of respect for his time. He made time for us today, as you all did. And but I want to get Chief Recovery Officer Doug Farnham on, if we could, please. Welcome, Doug. How are you?
I'm good, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
So just, the floor is yours. Just, any comments that you might have about S60 or anything of the topics that we're talking about today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Doug Farnham, Chief Recovery Officer for the state of Vermont. I would say I've read through the bill a couple times and tried to start digesting it. I would say one of the main things for me is that Vermont is grappling with the concept of what's the right level of support for the business community and for the agricultural community. I know that the Agency of Commerce and Community Development is working with Vermont Economic Development Authority on a revolving loan concept using receipts left over from the BGAP program, the Business Emergency Gap Assistance Program. And one of the things that I really liked about BGAP was that it was created to serve the business community, and it also had, a specific engagement and a specific set aside or priority for the agricultural community. And I personally don't think that Vermont can afford to provide the level of assistance that BGAP gave going forward for all disasters. I think that was a very robust program. It was a historic event, so the legislature put a lot of resources into it, which is laudable. But I think we're trying to propose some more sustainable concepts. And I think the forgivable loan model, or not forgivable, sorry, the revolving loan where you're giving people access to capital to make it through a rough patch is one of the more cost-effective ways we can recover from disasters. I do think of agriculture as very important to the culture of Vermont, but also as a business. And so I do think we would run a risk of people not taking on the crop insurance and the regular measures that a business should take on for their own hazards. So I don't think the administration has a position on S60 at this point. But I do think it's preferable when we can address the business community at large and prioritize those sectors where we want to make sure they get full support. I do know in BGAP the agricultural claims and primarily a lot of crop loss. The agricultural claims actually represented the largest portion of those payouts. I don't have the data in front of me, but Commissioner Goldstein would be able to speak to the composition of BGAP more precisely than me. Because I do think that's a good model for how we tried to at least partly meet the needs. The 50% amount in S60, I think, would be pretty challenging to achieve because I don't think we came anywhere near 50% coverage with BGAP. Overall, it was estimated that businesses in Vermont lost over $300 million. And we, BGAP was, I think, $32 million at the end of the day when you rolled in both disasters, the programs for those. So I think that 50% amount would represent a very, very high bar that the rest of the business community, where there's no way we could come anywhere close to supporting other businesses to that extent. And I recognize that agriculture is different and it's important to Vermont. But that kind of gap between 10% and 50% might trigger a lot of discussions.
Mr. Farnham, As far as to if we were to move forward with this bill, and you're in this business a lot more than we are, you've been a busy individual here in the last little bit. What should constitute a disaster as far as a declaration to kick a fund in like this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I had meant to say something about that and it slipped my mind. So I'm really happy that you prompted me there. For many of our communities, the county-based declaration structure from FEMA doesn't really work. There have been some and the weather patterns in recent years have been evolving in a troubling way where we're having more microbursts, we're having more localized events that cause significant damage, but to a community. And then when FEMA analyzes the data over on their county basis, it doesn't meet their thresholds. And so we have counties that weren't included in both disasters, but we had communities within those counties that were significantly damaged. And so I do think that we should not, if a program like this were to go forward, I don't think it should have no bar for a disaster declaration. But I also don't think the way that the presidential disaster declarations are structured is quite appropriate for this purpose. Or honestly, I don't think they work for the intended purpose completely either. I think they don't work very well for Vermont, unfortunately.
This is a state fund. This is a state fund.
Right.
And we're not relying on any federal dollars. Would it be sufficient to have your role as to declare that, the governor's role to declare that, a county, somewhere along the way, we have to have somebody trigger the funds?
Yes, Mr. Chair. And I think that the most appropriate would be a governor's declaration. I think that would hit the right threshold. Those happen. And for instance, with the 2023 floods, the governor's declaration existed for the 2023 floods, and it's not based on counties. The governor doesn't declare a disaster in counties. He declares a disaster in Vermont. And so that would cover any activity related to that event or pull it in. And so I think that's whenever we try to slice things in disasters by a region, by county lines, et cetera, it never works perfectly. So I think it should be, ideally, it would be a governor's declaration, and it would make businesses eligible on a statewide basis if that declaration existed.
I think one of the catalysts of one of the main presenters of the bill, which was Senator Hardy, was that she was one of the communities that get devastated in one of those, and that did get shut out from the fund. So what type, if the governor was to declare a disaster for the state, would that ensure that those communities would have gotten picked up?
Yes.
In a situation like this?
Hypothetically, so that was, yes, Addison County was left out, even though Ripton in Addison County received the largest amount of rain of any community, and had significant damages. Yes, so the governor declared that disaster, and that being a statewide declaration would have made, if this program existed, if it were keyed to a governor's declaration, would make businesses and farms in Addison County just as eligible as those in Franklin or Chittenden or Washington County.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we still have Doug and Nicole on. One of the things that I've always sort of resisted is putting a number in a statute. And I'll just make the point, $150,000 is a fixed figure. Inflationary pressure could make that sort of not work in 2 or 3 years. So I'll just leave that to the side. The percentage I get, up to 50% or whatever. But I love Nicole, who opined earlier on potential administrative challenges with this special fund, to tell me why this wouldn't work. If we could come up with some number, and I don't know what that number is going to be, it's probably not going to be 20 million. It may be south of that. Why could we not just put that in BGAP And that's something that's already being administered by your agency. So there would have to be sort of a carve out to include only agricultural reasons for this. And I realize that might be difficult, but can you sort of walk me through why that would not work, perhaps?
Sure. Thank you, Senator Palmer. So I think I said a little bit of this earlier, but so BGAP primarily was administered by Commerce and Community Development, and we deployed our staff to specifically take on agriculture applications. I think there was roughly 100 agriculture applications for 2024. And what I mean by deployed staff is we took folks that were out in the field and asked them to come and help us temporarily on these applications. I did applications myself. Our director of agricultural development did applications herself. We had our director at the lab when she had time to help us. So we don't actually have designated staff to do that ongoing.
Okay, that answers my question, I guess. I was just trying to find a way to not increase administrative resource needs, but it doesn't sound like I found a way, so.
Doug, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think, well, actually, yes, one thing, Mr. Chair. I do think that, you know, the federal lay of the land is complicated right now, right? So there was a disaster supplemental in December. I think everyone knows we're kind of trying to pay attention to how the new federal administration is approaching programs and what they're doing. But there was money for crop loss, and Vermont has been engaging, and Nicole can speak better to the details of this than I, but so there is federal assistance that's in play and in the pipeline right now. I do think that kind of removes some of the urgency to get something established in the short term. I don't think it removes the need to talk about this as a structural element for Vermont going forward. But I do think that, you know, in the short term and in immediate budgeting needs, we've got federal funds that should be coming to us in this area. How soon and what form they get here is something that we're still trying to figure out. But I think that should be a consideration as well, that, you know, there is assistance. And I think a lot of it was keyed to crop loss. And Nicole, you can correct or please add to anything I said there if anything is misstated.
Sure. I can jump in if you're okay with that, Chair.
Yes, please. Yes, absolutely.
Sure. So the funding that the Chief Recovery Officer is referring to, there's a couple different pots, but I think the main one that we would want to focus on is there was a appropriation in the continuing resolution of $220 million, and that is specific for, and Maddie actually spoke to this a little bit, specifically to fund disaster recovery over the last 2 years. And there are certain eligibility criteria around this $220 million that makes it so only the New England states plus Hawaii and Alaska qualify to get a cut of this money, so to speak. We were due to submit memorandums to the Farm Service Agency branch of USDA in January, which we did, and it looks like all of the New England states and Hawaii submitted data. Alaska did not choose to partake, so we are waiting, and we're anticipating that we will know how much of that money will come to Vermont in March.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like that could be 36 million. Assuming the math is divided by 6.
I don't know that it is. They have not told us what the formula is, or I'm not privy to that information. I think it's a combination of how many farms we have and what we reported for total losses over the last few years. And I know that Vermont was luckily pretty far ahead in our data collection from some of the other states. So hopefully we'll hear about that soon. What we do know about the money is that it will come in the form of a block grant, which we really hope gives us a little bit more flexibility.
Thanks, Nicole.
So explain, Nicole, as far as that, and I'm sorry, I'm not gonna try to get in the weeds on this neither, as you would ask how far do we get in the weeds, so earlier in your testimony. How does that money get, if that money does appear, how does that money get distributed? I know you said block grant, but what's the mechanism that distributes that money? So we're getting in, just kind of getting in the structure of how that money gets out the door and making sure that we don't get in the way if we try to set something up here. How's that money go out?
So my understanding at this point is that the money, they will identify what portion of that funding comes to Vermont. And then what happens from there is it will go through the Farm Services Agency straight to the state departments of agriculture, ours being one of them, in each state. It is up to the state to work with FSA to determine the programmatic barriers, or how the program would work and how that money would flow once it comes to the state. At this point, I don't have any more details on that, except we are expecting to be contacted by FSA in the near future to set up what they call a one-on-one, which is just Vermont with them to hear more about what the specifications of the program need to be.
So I'm wondering if, again, I'm just getting in the weeds here, and I don't want to lose what we have going here. So I'm just wondering is, as we look for a funding source, is that if we were to put something in here, dollars up to this amount, that if the federal government contributed funds to the state and this and that, and that's how this thing gets funded, if there was a severe enough disaster declaration. But I'm in the weeds, I know I am. So I'm kind of talking out loud a little bit about that. So, okay, I think we've beat that around pretty good shape. Unless there's Mr. Farnham, unless there's anything you would like to add on to that.
No, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Okay, I'd like to bring in Dr. Roy Beckford from UVM Extension, please. Yep. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I am well. And good morning to everybody else.
Thank you for being patient. We're getting through this, and like I said, I promised everybody it's on the screen. We're going to get them. So thank you. It's
always a learning process, and I'm a student of the game, so I'm happy to sit and listen and absorb everything that went on. I appreciate the invite, and it was great to listen to my co-chair for the Ag Disaster Task Force, Nicole Dubuque, as well as the wonderful presentation that Matty Kemper did earlier, as well as everybody else's input, including Mr. Roy, partially my namesake.
Doctor, I'll have you just introduce yourself, even though I have, but yep.
Yeah, I was just about to get there.
Sorry.
Roy, that's all right. That's all right. So my name is Roy Beckford, and I'm Associate Dean in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences here at UVM and Director of Extension. And I'm not sure exactly how much, I don't have a formal presentation, as you can clearly see, but a lot has been covered so far in the hour and a half that I've spent here. But I wanted to make sure that I say a couple of things that I feel are relevant. As co-chair of the Agriculture Disaster Task Force, we listened to and we talked to a lot of people across the state. The survey that the Agency of Ag did, we received 264 respondents. 70% of those, which is approximately 185 people, or exactly 185 people, reported that they had no crop insurance. Now, I want to say this quickly. If you understand the day-to-day life of a farmer, and probably this is where the whole idea of small, medium-sized farmers came in. If you understand the daily grind of small and medium-sized farms and their bottom line and how little they have to dispense off at the end of the day after they've inputted and outputted all the investments in cropping and livestock operations, you realize how significantly burdensome the whole operation is. I wonder often, how some people actually remain in agriculture and farming. I once, when I was a teenager, I went into a farmer's office in Miami, in Florida. And there was a huge banner on the wall behind the farmer. It was a very dingy place, but he had that very pristine banner that said, "Never criticize a farmer with your mouth full." And it has always stayed with me. And it stayed with me for a couple of reasons. Because we often assume that farming is business just like any other businesses, and it really isn't. It is actually the production of biologicals, whether you're looking at animals or you're looking at crops, and the patterns of and impacts from disasters, flooding, droughts, all of those. The elements are constantly in touch with what they're actually producing. And damage and losses don't just happen during disasters. It happens in between disasters. It happens after disasters. One of the things we did not do with the task force report was to include any case studies. But had we done that, it would be very interesting to note how many of our Vermont farmers just explained how depressed they were mentally. And that's one of the things that I feel that this bill is going to address, even though it hasn't stated that outrightly. The nimbleness of a fund that is provided to farmers who are devastated many times again and again will certainly come in handy and help people kind of override the mental strain of the operational constraints of agricultural productivity in the state. I have lived in other places where farmers have taken their own lives because they just cannot stand the daily strain. I think that this is going to be tremendously helpful as long as we can figure out and work through all of the issues that were dealt with here, the questions that were asked, the answers that were provided by my colleague, some of the issues that were raised by Maddie Kemper. I'm sure we'll get to a place where we can provide the nimble response to the farming community of Vermont that they really, really need. And it's also a wonderful way to say, I'm going to say here that we made some recommendations in the Agriculture Task Force report in February of 2024. And this is one of those follow-ups. My colleagues, of course, as Extension Director, I do have colleagues all across the Northeast and all across the country. And folks are very pleased to see this emerging. And they're saying, whoa, Vermont is very responsive. Hopefully they'll pass the bill. I support it. One question that was asked is who actually checks to see what kind of enterprises farmers have. Extension, UVM Extension is one of those entities that do that kind of work. We're in contact daily with our farming community. We know who the small farmers are. We know who the backyard gardeners are too. Our master gardeners are out there every day working within our communities. We have a good sense of what's going on. And increasingly, I want to make sure that I work in tandem with the Agency of Agriculture and other agencies, of course, to ensure that our work is synergistic. And I am in full support of the bill. And I just wanted to say those words here in hope that we will continue to work at this to make sure that it benefits the entire farming community of the state of Vermont.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for your comments. Any questions for the doctor? Doctor, thank you very much. We're gonna move on and appreciate you hanging in there with us today. And we got a few more people to get through. And if anybody at all has any comments as we're going through, just please let us know. Oh, I have to move now. It's kind of still fresh in our brain. Mary White, and probably got some statistics that we're looking for. And welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm not sure if they made it into your inbox or not, but I have some printed copies for all of you on some crop statistics from the RMA, USDA. And then these are just some program information as well.
Thanks, Linda.
So that top sheet. So I'll start by a brief introduction. You've seen me on Zoom a lot, so I really wanted to come here in person today. I am wearing my insurance hat today, but as you all know, I am a small farmer as well as the first vice president of Vermont Farm Bureau. But my full-time job is a crop and farm insurance specialist here in the state of Vermont and New Hampshire. I've been in the industry for 13 years, and I'm also a University of Vermont graduate. So happy to chat today about really just giving some information, I think, to help make this bill budgetly what it needs to be, and knowing the data behind these crop insurance losses that we keep hearing, all these questions occur. So that the first sheet I just passed along gives a breakout of what we call, Charlie referenced this in his testimony, the multi-peril insurance policies. So these are your common crops that are insured for in the state of Vermont. And you can see here, here's a copy of the, you have it there? Okay. So these are what we would call our crop insurance policies when we talk about your standard crop insurance markets for the state of Vermont. And some of these do vary by county. For one, apples is not available in every county, but these are the main ones. You'll see insured acres in one column and total acres reported to note. And this is from the 2023 crop year. So this would be looking at that flood year when the statistics from the agency say 70% of people did not have crop insurance. We're looking at that year here. And to note those total acres, that is only what has been reported to FSA. So there are many producers out there, I think, in that 70% that did not report those acres to FSA, which is why we see some discrepancy here. So I think maybe as part of this program, reporting acres to FSA should not be a hard task for a farm. They should be tracking their production anyway. And you would just go to your regional office, even by email, and say, hey, I would like to report my acres on this crop. It doesn't mean that you're signing up for a crop insurance policy, but that gives us a place where all this data can be stored and measured for crops. So we can have an accurate picture of the whole state and what crops are actually being grown. And that'll give us, I think, some important data to be able to collect and make this program effective for everyone. So on the next page, you'll see the total premiums and crop losses directly. And there is this historical data there to show you the differentials in the years. So if you look at that 2023 line, you'll see a significant loss paid by crop insurance based on the premium. I think the loss ratio is 1.5, which means that over 50% of what we had collected from premiums was paid in addition to those losses. So fairly significant number, but we know that was a very significant flood year. You can see the other historical data there as well. And again, these are just crop insurance policies for things that are listed here. Main perils paid out by crop insurance are fairly concise with what you have in the bill here. So excessive precipitation and drought are two that are frequently seen here, as well as freezing conditions and early frost, as we mentioned, and really hail would be a smaller one. Other insured causes of losses would also be fire and wildlife damage as well, but we really don't see those pay out in the state of Vermont. So as we're diving more deeply into crop insurance, there is another paper passed along that shows the NAP statistics directly. And I guess one thing to call on that first page here, we've heard Maddie testify a lot on these programs here. So these are, if you go down to the micro farm revenue protection and whole farm revenue protection, these are the RMA version of our diverse policies for those producers who have multiple crops that they're growing, blueberries, strawberries, your winter squashes. And look at here, 0 policies in the state of Vermont, 0 policies for micro farm. And that's nothing that saying producers aren't trying to get these policies. As we stated before, there's a lot of paperwork that goes into them. The premiums are high, and it just hadn't seemed to be a good fit for some of our diversified farms because it's a revenue protection. So it requires a lot of paperwork, and you have to show at least 5 years of business tax returns to be able to even apply. And that's provided in some of the other data for each program. I provided all the requirements in your slides as well, just so you have that data. But that was a shocking number to see that those policies just really aren't working for Vermont farms right now.
So you're saying is that there is insurance, but the hurdles to access this insurance is just so labor intensive and
Yeah, so I think it's really the 5 years of production that's hard, because a lot of these smaller diversified farms might not have that. So there are, I mean, like I said, the agents, myself, there are resources, your local FSA office to do some of these programs, but the premiums from some people that I've worked with to try to write one of these policies, at the end of the day, the premiums versus the risk, if that's their decision to make as a risk management professional on your own farm. This premium, is this worth the risk for me? And ultimately, usually they decide it's not. So this was something, these 2 programs haven't been available very long. There's not a lot of history here. These are newer programs from RMA, and they were designed to hopefully fill that need in the state of Vermont. And I do think there's room to work on those programs. How long that'll take, I don't know, but there is subsidy available for all of these. And even with the subsidies provided by the federal crop insurance program, it's still fairly expensive from a payout standpoint. So I just wanted to call attention to those 2 things on here. I really think that the program as a whole, with this bill supports, there is a need. There's absolutely a need, as we've seen. And as Charlie mentioned, we want to make sure that crop insurance is continued to be a tool and that we are able to accurately measure these numbers to be able to come up with a concise budget that works for the state and that works for our farms. Because if we're including crop insurance as a piece of this bill, then we need to know that data and we need to be able to analyze it to make sure that we have an effective budget for the state and for our farmers. So
we've raised that question, Chief Recovery Officer raised it, and I've asked a question, and I think it was asked again. It's not your concern, or it might be your concern some, or what's your thought about people going to rely on this program for their de facto insurance?
I think it's a concern, but I think farmers in today's society, it's been a big shift to running your farm as a business, and a lot of people are looking to risk management techniques. So I think it would behoove us to make sure, again, if the FSA reporting is a requirement or something along the lines to show that you tried to get crop insurance or just provide proof of your policy. I know for the BGAP grant, a lot of one of the requirements was you had to submit a certificate of insurance. That didn't necessarily show if you had a loss, but it was a certificate that you just request from your agent that yes, I did have a policy. So that was a requirement for the BGAP application. And I think that's just it. It's
for
how
all the business part of it, because I can see, and I guess it's the type of insurance that we would be talking about, because I can see on the BGAP insurance where you have businesses, it's pretty easy to show. But the flood insurance that you would have to show, or just that you had insurance?
They just wanted to show I had requests for proof of property insurance and crop insurance.
Okay, because on the BGAP where you have businesses, I don't know a business that isn't going to go in that they wouldn't have insurance. And so, but on a farmer, if you're asking them to have their crop insurance, well, then, maybe there's going to be a lot of farmers out there that traditionally hadn't bought crop insurance. I know your slide here shows that quite a few people are, yeah, I'd have to think. I'd have to noodle through that a little bit to see if just a requirement that they would have crop insurance was keep them from,
And again,
getting these funds.
and some of these small diversified farms, as we see, it might not work for them. And maybe it's just a contact to FSA saying, you know, I reported my crops here, so we have that record. But so those farms are now defaulting to what we've talked to before is the NAP coverage. And in there, I believe maybe on page 4 or 5, there are the statistics for what NAP paid out in the state of Vermont for 2023. And, you know, it's not a huge number, but it's 100, I believe, 70,000. And it's not by crop, but that just gives you an idea, a number to work with there. Any other questions around crop insurance? Because there are a few property insurance risks that we have written into this bill as well, which might be something we should address just from a, you know, because we're kind of combining two things here, right? We're talking about a lot of different losses, which involves different insurance policies in this bill. So we have the crop insurance, which really our perils here for eligible weather conditions are crop insurance perils. But when we dive into some of the eligible costs that we're looking to provide repayment for here, the one that really jumps out is the infrastructure or equipment repair and replacement. That's traditionally a property insurance, PNC casualty. I have insurance on my skid steer. You know, it was near the river, it got flooded. Flood's a common peril that equipment and livestock are insured for on your basic property and casualty farm insurance policy. Other things, livestock feed cost replacement. You know, if I had some round bales, we saw this in the flood floating down the river. That's something else that's traditionally covered in your property and casualty insurance, not necessarily in crop insurance. But the crop insurance piece of it is always, okay, I'm getting a premium based on my tonnage loss or quality loss that will potentially be able to help me recuperate and buy that feed elsewhere. So that's kind of how I view crop insurance as you're using it. You lost your crop here, and that's what that money is dedicated. That's what we're insuring for a loss. Other things here, the repair of farm roads and roads necessary to access farms. That is not something that's typically covered by a property insurance policy.
And ultimately, I think as far as just going down and scrolling through your farms, that your slides and stuff, I think that it's going to be at the discretion of the board that sets it up that's going to make those decisions that we're probably not going to write into this bill.
Yep.
We're going to, you know, the latitude of, I mean, again, to get down into the weeds of what we're going to do and what we aren't going to do. The people that are going to set this program, or the people that are going to administer this program, are going to have a lot of latitude to what they do.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to throw, you know, some ideas out there that we are, you know, looking at a lot of different insurance aspects here, and there are risk management techniques that a lot of farmers do utilize, but we do have, as we've seen in the flood, there is significant need. And from a cost standpoint, on my farm, for example, we've always bought, you know, the 50% coverage level for corn because it hasn't historically paid out. You know, we hadn't had a crop insurance loss until 2023 in 15 years on our farm. And then we had 2 right in a row. So it's something that I, as a farmer, need to analyze as well from a risk management.
Well, we had the potato grower in here the other day, so I'm just not planting potatoes down there no more.
Right.
2 years.
Avoidance is a risk management technique.
Yeah, 2 years to me is more than a trend, and or at least a trend that I can rely on, and so I'm moving at those fields. So.
And for smaller and medium-sized farms too, to the point where it does become, okay, can I afford this? You know, is this a risk? Again, it's about a risk assessment for the farmer to be able to say, okay, I can afford this year. You know, if the disaster does happen, how do we make that relationship work with crop insurance and the funding available for farmers in this program? So
I think we have a good understanding of that. Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Mary, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We're gonna, Andy Jones, please. Are you still with us, sir? Thank you. Thank you all for your patience. We're almost through it. Thank you. Appreciate you. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Andy Jones. I'm the farm manager at Intervale Community Farm in Burlington, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify on Senate Bill 60, the Farm Security Fund. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our operation, a little bit what's happened the last couple of years, show a couple of slides, and then make a few comments about the bill.
Yep.
Intervale Community Farm grows about 22 acres of mixed vegetables and about half an acre of greenhouses in Burlington. We started in 1990 and we're one of about 6 independently owned and operated farms leasing land from the nonprofit Intervale Center. In the summer, we employ about 15 people and we grow and sell vegetables for about 11 months of the year. We grow everything from A to Z. It's about 35 different crops. We have about 250 different planting dates, which is part of the reason something like crop insurance plans are complicated for farms like us. 90% of our vegetables are sold directly to consumers through a community supported agriculture or CSA arrangement. I've been with Intervale Community Farm since 1994. I'm also the past board president of NOFA Vermont and a past president and the current board treasurer of the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association. The entirety of our farm, as well as those of our neighbors, lies within the 100-year floodplain of the Winooski River. We expect floods and have been managing around them for decades, but the magnitudes of the floods are changing. In July of 2023, 99% of our farm was underwater, wiping out about $200,000 worth of crops. In July of 2024, the numbers were slightly better, with our crop losses closer to 150,000. But either year, these numbers are a big bite out of our approximate $750,000 in annual crop sales. So a couple quick slides. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So this is an area.
Andy,
Can
we're not
everybody
getting.
see? Oh,
No, we're not seeing it, Andy. Oh, there we go. It's coming on now.
okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so this is an aerial taken during the July 2023 flood. For scale, this whole area here is probably about 10 or 15 acres. This is a kind of our summer distribution area for our CSA plan with some of our tunnels here. These are some other tunnels of ours. These are for scale about 32 by 132. They're about 4,000 square feet each. You can see there's kind of this little postage stamp of land up here that didn't flood. If you get a little closer down on the ground, this is what it looks like close up. This is our distribution area, which had a lake running through it. And some of our storage facilities over here as well. Closer up, these are just some of the crops and what they look like. This is a summer planting of yellow squash and zucchini, our melon crop with the melons floating. And then as the water started to recede, you can see some of our potatoes that were inundated, and in the foreground, our acre of pumpkins. I know you've all seen a lot of things like that, so I'm not gonna. I'm gonna exit here from the screen share, if I can do that somehow. All right. Well, I'm having trouble with that, so. Oh, here we go. All right, are we back? Are you still seeing the screen?
Your picture's gone, but your slides are still up.
Okay. Let's see here. All right. Okay. I think.
We got it. Yep.
All right. I'm back.
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry for the technological challenge there. I'm one of those farmers.
Hey, you
that
did run a
does
night to it.
not- GoFundMe and other donations filled in about $66,000 of our losses in 2023. The Intervale Farmer Recovery Fund and the state BGAP program together provided us about $56,000 in 2024. But the rapid support from the private donations was really key to helping us replant, buying fertilizer, paying for labor, getting new seeds to get us back and up and running right away. The BGAP program, the BGAP payment was really important, but it did come 6 months later in December. So it wasn't there when we were really trying to buy stuff in July and August. A lot of our neighbors are still waiting for the federal crop insurance payments to come through. We are in a pretty favorable position. We're a direct market business. We have 700 regular households that are part of our CSA plan. We know a lot of them by name, and we have a lot of second generation customers. We're also located in Chittenden County, where a lot more people live, and there are more people that have an extra $50 or $100 to share. This scale of potential donors isn't available for many of the wholesale produce farms or dairies who are selling to a co-op. And yet the rapid, significant financial help is at the top of the list when I've talked with other farmers around Vermont about their disaster recovery needs. And this is why Senate Bill 60 and the Farm Security Fund are so important. Dedicated funds available to deploy on short notice will go a long way towards keeping farms in business. Vermont depends on farms for healthy food, for strong communities, for rural employment, and for a vibrant landscape so attractive to visitors. We all know that climate change is a current and future challenge for the state of Vermont. Farmers will face crop losses from flooding in the future and from extreme rainfall, extended droughts, and suffocating heat. We all want affected farms to keep producing and growing foods. I urge you to support Senate Bill 60, the Farm Security Fund, to keep Vermont agriculture growing into the future. And thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for hanging in there. We appreciate hearing your story very much. And you'll be the reason why we're sitting here today talking about this. So thank you. Any questions for Andy? Thank you again. We're gonna move on to Justin Rich, Burnt Rock Farm. We had Justin in the other day. Welcome, Justin. Thank you for hanging with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Justin Rich, Burnt Rock Farm in Huntington. And like Andy, I'm currently on the board of the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association. I'm not going to say a whole lot because you all listened to me talk last week, but I wanted to be here more just to answer any questions anybody had about the specific pitfalls of the current insurance system for farmers in our state. Specifically on the specialty crop end, I know coverage for dairy crops is also not amazing in our state, but I don't feel like I'm qualified to talk about that.
So what did we miss today that you would want to heard us talk about?
No, I think there's been a lot of good discussions about this. I mean, how to pay for it, what level of, does one give coverage to a farmer who's not even taking out basic coverage to protect themselves? That's a good question to ask. This is complicated. If I had an easy solution, I would have written one up a long time ago. And I appreciate Farm Bureau, NOFA, Rural Vermont, all these other groups, and Senator Hardy and Heffernan coming together to write this bill up. I really enjoy the fact that there is a conversation about how to protect our farms, our for-profit farmers who are really growing food and fiber and fuel for our communities and the region at large. I think it's just good to remind that this is no longer subsistence agriculture in the state. Most farmers aren't just going out and cutting whatever hay grows, feeding it to somebody else's cows, and then continuing on with their day. I mean, on our farm, we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year before we put a seed in the ground in early May. So at our scale, if we were to lose our entire crop on July 1st, I can't just go get a job for the rest of the summer and pay back what we've lost. On a really small scale, you can do that. And on a really large scale, you really can't do that because the the losses just get compounded so much. Like if you see what happened with Paul Mazza's farm down in Essex, it's just the numbers on the loss were tremendous. So I just wanted to be here to answer any specific questions if anybody had,
So-
because
Well, question back at you for both you and Andy. If this fund was sitting there, is this gonna keep you folks from buying crop insurance?
I have bought crop insurance consistently for I think 12 years, and I will continue to buy it. But like I said last week, I find the NAP program to be worthwhile, but it's because it's access to one-off federal disaster payments that often don't come in the year that you need it. So I find it to be just on an investment level worthwhile, but it doesn't necessarily provide the risk management tools within a season, as in speed of payout, that would be advantageous to a farm of our size. I mean, our farm, I'm always unclear how much context people require, but like Andy's farm and my farm, we're only about 25 acres of crops, but we have the economic impact of 150 cow dairy. So we're very small footprint, but there's a lot that goes on. Our farms probably average, what, 700 man hours per acre of crops. So it's, it takes a full-time person for every 3-4 acres of vegetables. So there's a lot going on economically on our farms. So I will continue to buy NAP insurance. This year I rolled the dice in an interesting way where I purchased the highest level of coverage, which is very expensive, on potatoes. But while our potatoes were affected by flooding, they were affected less than some of our other crops. So we kind of rolled the dice and bought increased coverage on one crop, but 3 of our other crops were the ones that were the most severely damaged. So that's a learning experience there. But still, even with NAP coverage at the high payout rate, it covers 65% of your actual production history. So that means you have to lose 35% before you even see a penny of payout, which is above our profit margins. And on certain crops, the payouts are tied to payment numbers that are not necessarily rational for our markets.
Andy, would this
Yes.
keep you from buying insurance if you stopped $20 million sitting in there or anything, or?
I don't think so. And I think we haven't bought crop insurance. Our business is a little bit different than Justin's. Justin has some larger quantities of certain crops, so it makes sense maybe to go through the crop insurance process. We have a lot of a little different things, as I was saying, 250 different, planting things. So for us, it's more the structure of the program, of the crop insurance program. This wouldn't really impact it. And I think my experience of, every other farmer is that we all want to get through every season and get over every obstacle with as little external assistance as possible. It's sort of a stubborn and proud industry, and people really don't want help if they can figure out another way. And so people are adapting and people are resilient and they're creative. I don't see that having a fund would really likely change people who are interested and for whom crop insurance is a good or a reasonable fit.
I just had a question for Justin. Have you looked at a whole farm policy in addition to NAP? I just didn't know if you had any experience to share on that process.
I think this is such a terrible answer, but I've had enough interaction with people who have tried it and had terrible interactions that I have not gone down that path. I know the ins and outs of NAP decently, so we've just stayed with that. But I hate it when farmers say, like, I heard NAP is bad, therefore I don't apply. I don't like that as an answer, so I'm embarrassed to say that is where I'm at with the whole farm revenue plan. So I would love to be disabused of the notion that is not a worthwhile product, because I think for diversified farms like ours, it might be a better style solution. But that's also kind of what I like about the Farm Security Fund and the BGAT that's happened is it doesn't make you tease out losses, because the way NAP works is basic coverage is you basically get a 25% payout at 100% loss. And that 25% payout might be based on a price that does not reflect our local prices.
And in the NAP insurance program, that's more designed for an emergency response versus I would consider a whole farm and micro farm closer to more of the MPCI, like the foreign policies. You would see more of a standard market policy. But again, I showed the statistics earlier. There's zero written premium in the state of Vermont. That is for a reason. So just part of the conversation. I wanted to get some input. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you for the question.
Anybody else that we haven't got that would like to comment today? Anybody else like to add any more comment that they didn't want to add or didn't get a chance to add? Okay, well, I want to thank everyone. I know it was a long session. It was a couple hours, and I apologize for that, but I don't know how any other way to make it any shorter. So thank you. Very valuable. Everybody contributed something, and it was very, very helpful to us. And I want to thank everybody. I hope everybody has a great weekend. Stay warm. Let's hopefully get the sun out here a little bit and get some reward for what we've been putting up with. So thank you very much. Appreciate you very much.